The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Laredo, Texas, as Rebecca Wilson stepped off the stagecoach, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The wanted posters bearing her father's likeness seemed to stare at her from every weathered wall and post in town, his name Wilson the same as hers, a burden heavier than the modest carpetbag clutched in her trembling hand. "That's Franklin Wilson's daughter," someone whispered as Rebecca made her way down the dusty Main Street. "Apple don't fall far from the tree." Rebecca kept her gaze fixed ahead, pretending not to hear the whispers that followed her like persistent flies. At 22, she'd spent the last 5 years running from her father's reputation, changing towns whenever someone made the connection. Laredo was meant to be her fresh start, but already the shadows of her past were catching up. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild enough that a woman traveling alone drew attention. But being the daughter of the most notorious bank robber this side of the Mississippi made her a marked woman before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. The small boarding house at the edge of town looked respectable enough, and the elderly woman who answered the door had kind eyes that didn't immediately fill with suspicion. "Room for the night?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep her voice steady. $3 a week, meals included," the woman replied. "I'm Martha Hayes. My husband and I run the place." Rebecca paid with coins she'd carefully counted out during the journey. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a wash basin by the window. She set her bag down and allowed herself a moment to breathe. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps in Laredo she could finally outrun the shadow of Franklin Wilson. The next morning, Rebecca approached the general store with determination in her step. She needed work, and she'd heard Mr. Thompson was looking for help. "I'm not hiring criminals," the storekeeper said bluntly before she could even introduce herself properly. "I've never committed a crime in my life," Rebecca replied, her voice quiet but firm. "Your father robbed my cousin's bank in Austin, shot the teller dead. Wilson blood is tainted." Rebecca lifted her chin. "I'm not my father." "Same difference," Thompson snapped. "Find work elsewhere." By midday, she'd been turned away from the dressmaker's shop, the hotel, and even the laundry. Her father's infamy had spread through town faster than she had. The small diner at the end of the street was her last hope. The sign in the window read "Help Wanted," and Rebecca squared her shoulders before pushing the door open. Inside, the smell of coffee and baking bread filled the air. A few patrons sat at tables, and a harried-looking woman hurried between them, balancing plates. "Excuse me," Rebecca said. "I saw your sign." The woman looked her up and down. "You ever waited tables before?" "Yes, madam, in Abilene and before that in Santa Fe." "I'm Dolores." "Kitchen's through there. 6 days a week, sunup to sundown, $2 weekly plus meals." Rebecca's shoulders sagged with relief. "I'll take it. Starting now," Dolores added, thrusting an apron into her hands. "We're short-handed since Betsy ran off with that drummer." For 3 hours, Rebecca worked harder than she ever had, serving coffee, clearing tables, and smiling through the suspicious glances from customers who clearly recognized her name when Dolores called it out. It was nearly 4 o'clock when the door swung open, and the diner fell silent. A tall man in a dust-covered duster stepped in, the silver star on his chest catching the afternoon light. "The sheriff." Rebecca's hands trembled as she set down a coffee pot. "Sheriff Blake," Dolores greeted. "Your usual, please," he said, his eyes finding Rebecca. "See you hired new help." "Just today," Dolores confirmed. "Rebecca, bring the sheriff some coffee." Rebecca forced herself to move, filling a mug with the dark brew and carrying it to his table by the window. As she set it down, the sheriff's hand caught her wrist. "Wilson, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she admitted, seeing no point in lying. Thought so. You've got his eyes. Rebecca stiffened. Is that going to be a problem, Sheriff? Sheriff Blake released her wrist and took a sip of coffee. Depends on whether you're planning to follow in Daddy's footsteps. I'm just trying to make an honest living. Good. Keep it that way. He turned his attention to the newspaper beside him, dismissing her. By closing time, Rebecca's feet ached and her back throbbed, but she'd earned her first day's wage. As Dolores counted out coins into her palm, the woman said, "Word travels fast in Laredo. I know who your father is." Rebecca's heart sank. "I'll find another place tomorrow." "Did I say I was firing you?" Dolores raised an eyebrow. "You're a hard worker, and that's what matters to me. But not everyone in town will feel the same. Watch yourself." Walking back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Rebecca became aware of hoofbeats behind her. She quickened her pace, but the rider caught up easily. "Miss Wilson." Rebecca turned to find a man she didn't recognize sitting atop a dappled gray horse. Unlike the sheriff, he wore no badge, but the gun at his hip was prominently displayed. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "Name's Coleman Drake," he said, tipping his hat. His face was sun-weathered and lean, with eyes the color of a summer storm. "I'm the foreman at the Double Circle Ranch outside town." Rebecca waited, unsure why this should matter to her. "Saw you getting turned away from half the businesses in town today," he continued. "Thought you might like to know there's work at the ranch if you're interested. Mrs. Hargrove needs help with the house." "Why would you offer me work when everyone else thinks I'm a criminal by association?" Coleman Drake's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Because I don't much care who your father was or what he did. Where I come from, a person earns their own reputation." Rebecca studied him suspiciously. "And where is that?" "Colorado, originally. Been with the Double Circle 5 years now." He shifted in his saddle. "It's honest work, Miss Wilson. Better pay than slinging coffee for Dolores. I just started there today. And you'll be listening to whispers and dealing with sideways looks for as long as you stay," Drake said bluntly. "Out at the ranch, you'd get a fresh start. No one to judge you but the cattle, and they're not particularly discerning." Despite everything, Rebecca found herself smiling at his wry humor. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Drake's expression grew serious. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when folks get judged for things that aren't their doing. It isn't right." A wagon rattled past, the driver glaring at Rebecca with undisguised hostility. "Think about it," Drake said, gathering his reins. "I'll be in town tomorrow morning if you're interested." He touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving Rebecca standing in the twilight with an unexpected choice. That night, Rebecca barely slept. The boarding house walls were thin, and she could hear 2 men in the next room discussing Franklin Wilson's latest suspected robbery in Houston. Her father had been a shadow over her life for so long. She could hardly remember a time when his crimes hadn't defined her existence. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She packed her meager belongings, paid Martha Hayes for the night, and waited on the porch of the general store. True to his word, Coleman Drake rode into town as the morning stage arrived. "Miss Wilson," he greeted, dismounting, "have you considered my offer?" "I have," Rebecca said. "I accept, provided the work is as honest as you claim." A smile cracked across Drake's face, transforming his stern features. "Mrs. Hargrove will be pleased. She's been managing alone since her last help left to get married. When do I start?" "Now, if you're ready," Drake said, gesturing to his horse. "We can double up until we reach the ranch, then send a proper buggy for your next trip to town." The idea of riding with a strange man made Rebecca hesitate, but the alternative, staying in a town where her name had already condemned her, was worse. "Very well," she agreed, gathering her courage along with her carpetbag. Drake helped her mount in front of him. his hands respectfully steady as he positioned her side saddle before swinging up behind. The closeness was uncomfortable at first, but as they left Laredo behind, Rebecca felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Why did you really offer me this job, Mr. Drake?" she asked as they rode through rolling grassland dotted with mesquite. There was a pause before he answered. "Everyone deserves the chance to write their own story, Miss Wilson, not be trapped in someone else's." The Double Circle Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of Texas rangeland. The main house was an impressive two-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows, a symbol of prosperity in a land where most dwellings were simple affairs of wood and adobe. As they approached, a woman stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun. She was in her 50s, Rebecca guessed, with silver threading through her dark hair and a bearing that spoke of quiet authority. "Margaret, this is Rebecca Wilson," Drake said as he helped Rebecca dismount. "The help I mentioned." Margaret Hargrove's eyes were keen as she assessed Rebecca. "Wilson," she repeated. "Any relation to the bank robber?" Rebecca's heart sank. "He's my father, madam." "But I haven't seen him in 5 years." To her surprise, Mrs. Hargrove simply nodded. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam." "Sew, mend, keep a house in order, all of that," Rebecca confirmed. "Good. My arthritis makes those tasks difficult these days. Coleman, show her to the room off the kitchen." "Rebecca, you'll start by helping with lunch for the hands. They'll be in at noon." And just like that, Rebecca was hired with no mention of her father's crimes or her own presumed guilt. The room was small but comfortable, with a real bed, not just a cot, and a chest of drawers that was empty and waiting for her few possessions. A window looked out toward the bunkhouse and corrals, where men were already at work with the horses. "Mrs. Hargrove lost her husband 2 years ago," Drake explained as Rebecca set down her bag. "Her son Richard runs the cattle operation, but he's often away on business. The ranch hands respect her, but she needs help with the house." "Thank you for this opportunity," Rebecca said quietly. "I won't disappoint you." Drake's eyes met hers, serious and direct. "Everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves on their own merits, Miss Wilson. Your father's crimes marked you as guilty too in town, but out here, you write your own story now." His words echoed in Rebecca's mind as he left her to settle in. You write your own story now. It was a freedom she'd never fully had before, always running from the shadow of her father's reputation. The first week at Double Circle was exhausting but gratifying. Rebecca rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the hands, spent the day cleaning, cooking, and helping Mrs. Hargrove with household tasks, then fell into bed each night too tired to even dream. Coleman Drake kept his distance, professional and polite when their paths crossed. She learned he was 30 years old, had fought for the Union in the war despite being from border country, and had the respect of every man on the ranch. "Drake's fair but tough," explained Joe, one of the younger ranch hands, as Rebecca served stew at the long table in the cookhouse. "Saved the boss's life during a cattle stampede last spring." "He seems very capable," Rebecca said neutrally, trying not to show too much interest. "Best foreman in the county," agreed another cowboy. "Could run his own spread if he wanted, but he's loyal to the Hargroves." Rebecca found herself watching for Drake whenever she went to hang laundry or fetch water. There was something compelling about him, not just his physical presence, though he cut an impressive figure on horseback, but the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. On Sunday afternoon, her first day off, Rebecca was sitting on the back porch with a book when Drake approached from the stables. "Miss Wilson," he greeted, removing his hat. "Enjoying your day of rest?" "Very much," she replied, marking her place in the novel. "Though it feels strange not to be working." "Everyone needs time to breathe," he said, settling on the porch step below her. "Mrs. Hargrove says you've been a godsend." Rebecca felt warmth bloom in her chest at the praise. "She's been very kind to me." "Margaret Hargrove doesn't offer kindness unless it's earned," Drake said. "She values honesty and hard work above all else. Unlike most people I've encountered, she didn't immediately judge me for my father's crimes." Drake was silent for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "The Hargroves know something about being judged unfairly. Richard's wife left him because she couldn't stand ranch life. Folks in town still talk about it like he drove her away, when the truth is she never gave the life a proper chance." "Is that why he's away so often?" "Partly. Cattle business takes him to Kansas and beyond, but I think he also finds it easier than facing the gossip." Drake glanced up at her. "People are quick to assign blame and slow to offer second chances. You seem to be an exception to that rule, Mr. Drake." A shadow crossed his face. "I've had my share of judgments. Makes a man careful about passing them on others." Before Rebecca could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A cloud of dust on the horizon resolved into a lone rider pushing his horse hard toward the ranch. Drake was on his feet immediately, his relaxed demeanor replaced by alertness. "Something's wrong," he muttered, striding toward the approaching rider. Rebecca followed, a sense of foreboding settling over her as the rider, one of the ranch hands who'd been sent to town for supplies, practically fell from his exhausted horse. "Drake," the man gasped. "Sheriff's forming a posse. Franklin Wilson's been spotted near Laredo." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. Her father here, after all this time. Drake's expression hardened as he glanced at Rebecca. "When?" "Last night. Robbed the bank in Nuevo Laredo, then crossed back over. Sheriff thinks he might be heading this way." "Why would he come here?" Drake demanded. The ranch hand wiped sweat from his brow. "Word is he's looking for his daughter. Asking all over town about a young woman named Wilson." All eyes turned to Rebecca, who felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. Her father was looking for her. After 5 years of silence, after abandoning her when she was 17, Franklin Wilson wanted to find his daughter. "Get inside, Miss Wilson," Drake said quietly. "We need to talk." In the parlor of the main house, Mrs. Hargrove listened gravely as the situation was explained. Her arthritic hands were steady as she poured coffee for them all, her expression betraying nothing of her thoughts. "So," she said finally, fixing Rebecca with a direct gaze, "your father has resurfaced and is looking for you. The question is, do you wish to be found?" Rebecca's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "No, madam. I've spent years trying to escape his shadow. The last time I saw him, he tried to involve me in one of his robberies. When I refused, he left me with nothing but his name to haunt me." "You never mentioned this," Drake said, his voice tight. "It's not something I'm proud of," Rebecca replied. "He wanted me to distract a bank guard while he and his gang emptied the vault. I couldn't do it. The next morning he was gone. I've been running from his reputation ever since." Mrs. Hargrove nodded thoughtfully. "Coleman, what do you suggest?" Drake paced the room, his face grim. "If Franklin Wilson is asking about Rebecca in town, it won't be long before someone mentions she's here. The sheriff will likely come looking too, thinking she might be in league with her father." "I'm not," Rebecca said firmly. "I would never—" "I believe you," Drake interrupted. "But Sheriff Blake may need more convincing." He turned to Mrs. Hargrove. "We should send word to Richard. In the meantime, I think it best if Miss Wilson stays out of sight." "The line shack in the north pasture," Mrs. Hargrove suggested. "It's isolated enough that no one would think to look there, but close enough that we can get word to her quickly if needed." Drake nodded. "I'll take her there tonight after dark." As the sun set, Rebecca packed a small bundle of necessities while Mrs. Hargrove prepared food supplies. The fear that had been her constant companion for years had returned, lodging in her throat like a stone. "Ready?" Drake asked from the doorway. He'd changed into darker clothes, practical for night riding. Rebecca nodded, unable to trust her voice. The thought of her father searching for her filled her with dread. What did he want after all this time? Money? Help with another crime? Or was he simply trying to drag her back into his life of lawlessness? They slipped out through the kitchen door, where two horses waited, saddled and ready. Drake helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. "Stay close," he murmured. "We'll keep to the creek bed where the ground is harder. Less chance of leaving tracks." They rode in silence through the gathering darkness, the only sounds the soft thud of hooves on earth and the occasional night bird calling. Rebecca found herself studying Drake's profile in the moonlight, grateful for his steady presence in this new crisis. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as they paused to let the horses drink at a small stream. "You barely know me." Drake was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I know what it's like to have your future determined by your past. My father was a drunk who gambled away our family farm in Colorado. After he died, no one would extend credit to the son of Jeremiah Drake. Didn't matter that I'd never touched a drop or placed a bet. His reputation became mine." Rebecca felt a surge of understanding. "How did you escape it?" "I left, came to Texas, worked my way up from nothing, built my own name." He looked at her directly. "You deserve the same chance, Rebecca." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared experience, of mutual understanding. The line shack was small but solidly built, with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and basic provisions. Drake quickly built a fire while Rebecca arranged the supplies Mrs. Hargrove had sent. "I'll bring more food in 2 days," Drake said, setting a rifle by the door. "Do you know how to use this?" Rebecca nodded. Growing up with Franklin Wilson had ensured she knew her way around firearms, though she'd never used one against another person. "Only for emergencies," Drake cautioned. "Sound carries out here." He hesitated at the door. "I don't like leaving you alone, but my absence from the ranch would raise questions." "I'll be fine," Rebecca assured him, though her heart raced at the thought of being alone in the wilderness. "Thank you, Coleman." He looked surprised at her use of his name, then pleased. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Mrs. Hargrove." After he'd gone, Rebecca secured the door and tried to settle herself for a restless night. The small cabin felt both like a sanctuary and a prison, safety from her father's reach, but a reminder that she was still defined by his actions. The next day dragged endlessly, as Rebecca tried to occupy herself with the few books Drake had brought and simple chores around the cabin. By evening, the isolation was wearing on her nerves, every sound from the surrounding wilderness making her jump. It was just past midnight when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Rebecca grabbed the rifle, her heart pounding, and moved to the window. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the clearing in front of the cabin. A lone rider approached slowly, his hat pulled low, not Drake's broad-shouldered silhouette. This man was leaner, with a familiar tilt to his head that sent ice through Rebecca's veins. Franklin Wilson had found her. Rebecca backed away from the window, mind racing. How had he tracked her here? Had someone from town betrayed her whereabouts? "Rebecca," her father's voice, once so commanding in her childhood memories, now sounded older, rougher. "I know you're in there, girl. Come out and talk to your old man." She remained silent, the rifle steady in her hands. 5 years had passed since she'd last seen him, since he'd tried to pull her into his life of crime and then abandoned her when she refused. "Don't be stubborn," he called. "I've been looking for you for months. Got something important to discuss." Still, Rebecca held her silence, though her hands trembled on the weapon. "Fine," Franklin Wilson sighed. "Have it your way." There was a pause, then the sound of boots on the wooden steps. "I'm coming in, Rebecca. Don't do anything foolish." The door handle rattled. Rebecca raised the rifle. "It's locked, Pa," she finally called, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I'm armed." A laugh from the other side of the door. "That's my girl. Always were smarter than most. Go away. I have nothing to say to you." "Is that any way to greet your father after 5 years?" The handle rattled again, more forcefully. "I need your help, Rebecca. One last job, then we can both disappear for good, live like royalty." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "I'm not helping you rob anyone. I've built a life here." "A life?" Franklin scoffed. "Hiding in a shack, running from who you really are." "I'm not running anymore," Rebecca replied. "And I'm not who you think I am. I'm not a thief or an outlaw. I never was." "Blood tells, girl. You've got Wilson blood." "Blood doesn't determine destiny, Pa. I choose my own path." Franklin was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had hardened. "I tried to be reasonable. Now listen close. I've got men watching this ranch. If you don't come with me willingly, people will get hurt, starting with that foreman who brought you here." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "You leave Coleman out of this." "Ah," Franklin said softly. "There it is. You care about him. Well, his fate is in your hands. Come with me now, help me with this one job, and he lives. Refuse, and he dies." Tears burned in Rebecca's eyes as the impossible choice stretched before her. Save the man who had offered her a chance at a new life, or preserve the freedom she'd finally found. "I'll give you until dawn," Franklin said. "Then I start shooting cowboys." The sound of retreating footsteps, followed by hoofbeats, told her he was leaving for now. Rebecca sank to the floor, the rifle across her knees, her mind racing. She couldn't let her father hurt Coleman or anyone at the double circle. But helping him commit another crime went against everything she believed, everything she'd been trying to prove about herself. As the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Rebecca made her decision. She would face her father on her own terms. She left the rifle in the cabin and stepped outside, scanning the surrounding trees and brush. "I know you're out there, Pa," she called. "Let's talk." For a long moment, only birds answered her. Then a figure emerged from the tree line, leading a horse. Franklin Wilson looked older than Rebecca remembered, his once dark hair now gray at the temples, lines etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. But he still moved with the easy confidence that had once made her believe he was invincible. "Smart girl," he said, approaching. "Ready to help your old man?" "No," Rebecca replied steadily. "I'm here to tell you to leave. Go now, and I won't tell the sheriff where to find you." Franklin's eyes hardened. "That's not how this works." "It is now," Rebecca countered. "I'm not 17 anymore, Pa. I'm not afraid of you." "Maybe not," Franklin conceded. "But you're afraid for your foreman friend and the old lady at the ranch. My men are in position, Rebecca. One signal from me and they start shooting." Rebecca felt sick. "Why are you doing this? Why now, after all this time?" "Because I need you," Franklin admitted. "The job I'm planning requires someone the bank manager trusts, someone who can get close without raising suspicion." "You've always had a way about you, Rebecca. People trust you. So you can betray that trust." "No," Franklin's hand moved to his gun. "I'm not giving you a choice." Before he could draw, the sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the morning air. "I believe the lady said no." Coleman Drake emerged from behind the cabin, rifle aimed steadily at Franklin Wilson's chest. Rebecca's heart leapt at the sight of him. "Coleman!" "How Mrs. Hargrove was worried," Drake explained, his eyes never leaving Franklin. Sent me to check on you last night." I saw him approach and circled around. Franklin's eyes darted between them, calculating. "You're outnumbered, Cowboy. Your men are currently having breakfast with the sheriff and his deputies," Drake interrupted. "They weren't as loyal as you thought. Rolled over on you as soon as they were caught scouting the ranch." Rebecca saw the truth of it dawn in her father's eyes, followed by a flash of desperate anger. His hand twitched toward his gun. "Don't," Drake warned. "I've no desire to shoot Rebecca's father, but I will if you force my hand." For a tense moment, Rebecca thought her father might draw anyway, forcing a confrontation that could only end in bloodshed. Then, with a bitter laugh, Franklin Wilson raised his hands. "You've got spirit, Cowboy, I'll give you that." His eyes found Rebecca's. "He remind you of anyone?" "Got the same stubborn streak I do." "He's nothing like you," Rebecca said quietly. "Coleman believes in me. He gave me a chance when no one else would." Franklin studied her face. "You love him," he stated, not a question but a realization. The words struck Rebecca like lightning. Did she love Coleman Drake? The man who had offered her work when others shunned her, who believed in second chances, who had come to her rescue without hesitation. "That's not your concern," she managed to say. "Keep your gun on him, Rebecca," Drake said, tossing her a length of rope. "We need to secure him until the sheriff arrives." Rebecca caught the rope, her father watching her with a strange expression, something between anger and reluctant respect. "So this is how it ends," Franklin said as she bound his hands. "My own daughter turning me in." "You gave me no choice," Rebecca replied. "You threatened people I care about." Franklin shook his head. "Wilson blood will tell in the end. You're more like me than you want to admit." "No, Pa, I'm writing my own story now." The ride back to the ranch was tense, with Franklin Wilson secured on his horse between Rebecca and Coleman. As they crested the final hill overlooking the double circle, Rebecca saw sheriff's deputies gathered in the yard, and her father's 2 accomplices already in custody. "You could still let me go," Franklin said quietly to Rebecca. "For old time's sake." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "And let you continue hurting people." "No, this ends today." Sheriff Blake approached as they rode into the yard. "Franklin Wilson," he said with grim satisfaction. "Been chasing you for years." "Wouldn't have caught me if not for my daughter," Franklin replied bitterly. "She did what was right," the sheriff said, gesturing for his deputies to take Franklin into custody. "Unlike some, she knows the difference between family loyalty and justice." As they led her father away, Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. Franklin Wilson paused, looking back at her. "You really are your mother's daughter after all," he said, something like pride in his voice despite everything. "She always was the better of us." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever given her. As the sheriff's party departed with their prisoners, an odd silence fell over the ranch. Rebecca stood in the yard, suddenly uncertain. Her father's arrival and capture had changed everything. Would the people of Double Circle still want her around now that her connection to a notorious outlaw had been so dramatically confirmed? Mrs. Hargrove approached, her cane tapping on the packed earth. "Well," she said briskly, "that's enough excitement for one day. Rebecca, I believe there's bread to be baked for dinner." Rebecca stared at her in surprise. "You still want me here, did I say otherwise?" Mrs. Hargrove raised an eyebrow. "You just helped capture 3 dangerous criminals." "I'd say that confirms you belong on the right side of the law, wouldn't you?" Relief washed over Rebecca like a cool breeze. "Yes, madam, thank you." As Mrs. Hargrove returned to the house, Coleman stepped beside Rebecca. "She's right, you know. What you did today took courage." "I was terrified," Rebecca admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in spite of it." His hand found hers, warm and steady. "Rebecca, Mr. Drake," a ranch hand ran up, interrupting whatever Coleman had been about to say. "There's trouble with the North herd." "Rustlers, by the looks of it." Coleman's expression shifted to instant alertness. "Get the men, we ride in 5 minutes." He turned back to Rebecca, regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry I have to go," she urged. "We'll talk later." He squeezed her hand once, then was gone, shouting orders as men ran for their horses. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The attempted rustling was thwarted, but several ranch hands were injured in the confrontation. Rebecca found herself helping tend wounds and prepare meals for the returning men, too busy to dwell on her father's arrest or her unfinished conversation with Coleman. News came that Franklin Wilson and his accomplices had been transferred to the territorial prison in Austin to await trial. With the immediate threat past, life at Double Circle began to return to normal. It was a week after her father's capture when Rebecca finally found herself alone with Coleman again. She was hanging laundry in the late afternoon sun when he approached from the stables. "Miss Wilson," he greeted, removing his hat. The formality felt strange after all they'd been through. "Mr. Drake," she replied, matching his tone while hiding a smile. He cleared his throat, uncharacteristically nervous. "I was wondering if you might walk with me. There's something I'd like to discuss." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Of course." They walked in companionable silence toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the ranch property. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grass, and birds called to each other as they settled for the night. "I received a letter today," Coleman said finally, "from a lawyer in Denver. Seems my uncle passed away and left me his ranch in Colorado. It's not large, but it's good land. Enough to build something worthwhile." Rebecca felt a sudden hollowness in her chest. "You're leaving." "I'm considering it." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "The thing is, I can't imagine going without you." Rebecca's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Coleman took her hands in his. "I'm saying that these past weeks have shown me something I never expected to find. In you, Rebecca Wilson, I've found someone who understands what it means to fight for your own identity, to build something new from the ruins of the past." "Coleman, let me finish," he said gently. "When I first offered you work, it was because I recognized something in you, a determination I admired. But as I've come to know you, that admiration has grown into something much deeper." Rebecca's heart pounded as he continued. "I love you, Rebecca. I love your courage, your kindness, your refusal to be defined by your father's choices. I'm asking if you'll come with me to Colorado as my wife to build a new life together." Tears sprang to Rebecca's eyes. "You want to marry me, even knowing who my father is, what people might say?" Coleman's smile was tender as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "I don't care what people say. I care about who you are, the woman who faced down her outlaw father to protect people she cared about. The woman who works harder than anyone I know to prove herself worthy of trust. That's the woman I want to spend my life with." "But what if I'm not who you think I am?" Rebecca whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. "What if my father is right, and Wilson blood will tell in the end? We are not our parents, Rebecca. We make our own choices, write our own stories." His hands tightened around hers. "And I want to be part of your story if you'll have me." In that moment, the last of Rebecca's doubts fell away. "Yes," she said, her voice strengthening. "Yes, Coleman Drake. I will marry you and go to Colorado and build a new life, far from the shadows of the past." His smile was like sunrise as he gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like a promise, like the beginning of everything she'd never dared to hope for. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the parlor of the Double Circle Ranch house. Mrs. Hargrove insisted on hosting, declaring that Rebecca was as good as family after all they'd been through together. Richard Hargrove returned from his business trip in time to attend, bringing with him a silver tea service as a wedding gift, and the news that Franklin Wilson's trial date had been set. "Will you attend?" Coleman asked Rebecca privately as they prepared to depart for Colorado. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I think I must," she decided. "Not for his sake, but for my own, to close that chapter properly before we begin our new life." Coleman nodded. "Then we'll delay our departure until after the trial. Whatever you need to face, we face together now." The trial was held in Austin 2 months later. Rebecca sat in the crowded courtroom, Coleman steady beside her, as her father's crimes were recounted in meticulous detail. Franklin Wilson had been connected to 12 bank robberies across 3 states, resulting in 3 deaths and countless livelihoods affected. When he was brought in, shackled and dressed in prison garb, he looked older and smaller than Rebecca remembered. His eyes found hers immediately, a flicker of something regret, pride, crossing his face before he turned away. Rebecca testified about her final confrontation with him, her voice never wavering as she recounted his threats and her choice to help apprehend him. When asked about her earlier life with her father, she spoke truthfully of his abandonment and her years of struggling under the weight of his reputation. The verdict was never in doubt. Franklin Wilson was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, with little chance of living to see release given his age and the harsh conditions. After the sentencing, Rebecca was granted a few minutes to speak with him under guard. "You did well," Franklin said, an unexpected note of approval in his voice. "Stood your ground, spoke your piece. Your mother would be proud." "I wish I could have known her better," Rebecca replied. It was the closest they'd ever come to discussing Mary Wilson, who had died of fever when Rebecca was just 8. "She was the best of us," Franklin said softly. "Had a moral compass I never possessed. You got that from her, not me." Rebecca studied the man who had shaped so much of her life, both by his presence and his absence. "I need to ask you something, Pa. Why did you come looking for me after all those years? The truth." Franklin was silent for a long moment. "I told myself it was because I needed your help for that bank job. But the truth," he met her eyes directly. "I was dying, Rebecca." "What?" "Doctor in Mexico said my heart's giving out. Might have a year, might have less. I wanted to see you one more time, maybe make amends in my own way." He laughed bitterly. "Not that I went about it right." Rebecca felt an unexpected surge of emotion. "Why couldn't you just have come to me honestly, without the threats, without trying to drag me into another crime?" "Because that's all I know," Franklin admitted. "I've been an outlaw so long I don't know how to be anything else." His shackles clinked as he shifted. "But you found a different path, a better one." "I had help," Rebecca said, thinking of Coleman waiting outside. "Your cowboy." Franklin nodded. "He's a good man, better than I ever was." "Yes," Rebecca agreed simply. Franklin seemed to struggle with his next words. "I don't expect forgiveness, Rebecca. But I want you to know that, despite everything, I've always been proud of you. Too proud, maybe, to admit how badly I failed you." It wasn't the apology she had once longed for, but it was perhaps the most honest thing her father had ever said to her. "Goodbye, Pa," Rebecca said, rising. "I hope you find some peace." His eyes, so like her own, held hers for a final moment. "You already have, I think. Hold on to it." She left the prison with a strange lightness, as though a burden she'd carried for years had finally been set down. Coleman was waiting, his tall figure a steadying presence against the bright Texas sun. "Ready?" he asked simply. Rebecca took his hand, feeling the strength of his fingers entwined with hers. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." The journey to Colorado took them through landscapes Rebecca had never seen vast prairies giving way to foothills. And finally, the majestic Rocky Mountains rising like sentinels against the sky. By the time they reached the valley where Coleman's inherited ranch lay, autumn was painting the aspens gold against the evergreens. The ranch house was smaller than the double circle's main house, but solidly built of logs and stone. A creek ran close by, and meadows stretched toward distant mountains. "It needs work," Coleman acknowledged as they stood on what would become their front porch. "The barn roof leaks, and the fences need mending before we can bring in cattle next spring." Rebecca surveyed the property, seeing not its current state but its potential. "It's perfect," she declared. "Our perfect beginning." That first winter tested them with blizzards and temperatures that made Rebecca's Texas blood seem thin indeed. But they worked side by side, making repairs, preparing for spring, and building relationships with their nearest neighbors, a family 3 miles down the valley, who welcomed them with typical frontier hospitality. By spring, the Drake's ranch, which they named New Chapter, was ready for cattle. Coleman traveled to Denver to arrange purchase of their first small herd, while Rebecca prepared the vegetable garden and chicken coop that would provide much of their food. Their nearest town was Silverdale, a growing community 15 miles away where they sold butter and eggs when supplies ran low. Unlike Laredo, no one in Silverdale knew Rebecca as Franklin Wilson's daughter. Here, she was simply Mrs. Coleman Drake, the capable rancher's wife with the ready smile and deft hand at bargaining. "You're building quite a reputation in town," Coleman teased after one trip where Rebecca had managed to trade her preserves for not only the flour and coffee they needed, but also seeds for rare flowers she coveted for their garden. "A good reputation for a change," Rebecca replied with a satisfied smile. "Built on nothing but my own actions. It was a hard life, but a good one. Each day brought challenges, but also the satisfaction of meeting them together." Rebecca found herself stronger than she'd known, both in body and spirit. A year after their arrival, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows in a riot of color, Rebecca shared news that added a new dimension to their happiness. "A baby," Coleman repeated, wonder spreading across his features as he laid a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Due in winter," Rebecca confirmed. "We'll be 3 by Christmas." He gathered her close, his voice rough with emotion. "I never thought I could be this happy. That night in Laredo when I first saw you getting turned away from shops, I had no idea where that simple offer of work would lead us. You gave me the chance to write my own story," Rebecca reminded him, echoing his words from long ago. "Now we're writing it together." Charles Drake was born on a snowy December night, with only Coleman and their neighbor Mrs. Tompkins to help bring him into the world. He had his father's strong features and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cries. "He's perfect," Coleman whispered, cradling his son with hands that could break a wild horse but now trembled with the weight of this tiny new life. "Perfect," Rebecca agreed, exhausted but radiant. "And entirely his own person, not defined by us or anyone who came before." As Charles grew, so did the ranch. The Drakes added more cattle, then horses, developing a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. By the time Charles was 5, they had hired 2 hands to help with the increasing workload. Rebecca received a letter that spring from Mrs. Hargrove, with news of the double circle and, unexpectedly, of Franklin Wilson. He had died in prison, his heart finally giving out as predicted. He was buried in the prison cemetery, with no one to mourn him but a few fellow inmates who'd appreciated his tales of outlawry. Rebecca read the letter twice, searching for the emotions she expected to feel: grief, perhaps, or anger, or even relief. Instead, she found a quiet acceptance. Her father had made his choices as she had made hers. That evening she told Coleman about the letter as they sat on their porch, watching Charles chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Are you all right?" Coleman asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said finally. "I made my peace with my father and his legacy long ago. His death doesn't change that." Coleman pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're the strongest person I know, Rebecca Drake." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence as she always had. "Not alone," she corrected. "We're strong together." As twilight deepened into night, Charles ran to them, his small face alight with excitement. "Look, Mama, look what I caught," in his cupped hands. A firefly glowed with intermittent light, a tiny star captured briefly before it would inevitably fly free. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said, smiling at her son's wonder. "But remember what we agreed," Charles nodded solemnly. "We have to let it go, because everything deserves to be free." He opened his hands, and the firefly rose into the darkening sky, its light joining countless others in the summer night. Rebecca watched it go, her heart full. This was the legacy she would pass on to her son, not the shadow of crimes committed long ago, but the understanding that each life deserves the chance to find its own path, to write its own story under open skies. Coleman's arm tightened around her, and Charles scrambled into her lap, his small body warm against hers. Together, they watched the night unfold, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choices made and promises kept. In the years that followed, the Drakes' ranch prospered. A daughter joined their family, Elizabeth, named for Coleman's mother, with Charles's dark hair, but Rebecca's clear gray eyes. The children grew strong in the mountain air, raised with stories of courage and second chances. Rebecca sometimes thought of Laredo and the young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach, burdened by a name not of her choosing. How far she had traveled, not just in miles but in self-understanding. Her father's crimes had marked her as guilty too, but Coleman Drake had been right that day long ago. She had written her own story, and it was a good one.